Welcome, everybody, to the Homegrown Podcast from Keep Indiana Learning. I'm your host, Jeff Harker. And today we're continuing our journey with, this is part 2 now, our journey through TNTP's Opportunity Makers Research with a deep dive into one of its most essential themes, consistency. Whitney Newton and Nadia Nibbs from TNTP are here to help us understand how schools can build reliable routines and supports that help every student succeed. We'll talk research, real stories, and practical strategies. Let's get started. Welcome, Whitney and Nadia.
Thanks, Jeff. We're glad to be here.
I'm so glad to see you again, Whitney and Nadia. It's really good to have you with us today. And so let's dive right in. We said this podcast was about consistency. What is consistency? What does it mean? And what does it mean in the context of your Opportunity Makers research that you did?
Sure. And I'll reintroduce myself too as we start and then hand it to Nadia too in a minute. But I've been now on a couple of shows with you, Jeff, and also with Marty, and shared some blogs on this research. And I work for a nonprofit, TNTP. We do research and consulting, and this is our most recent paper that we released. My work is in Indiana, which is why we're working together. And I'm from the northwest side of Indianapolis. I went to Pike High School. Go Red Devils. All of my siblings and all of our spouses are also all Red Devil graduates. So I'm just really excited to get to share this research in Indiana. So I think what is important to say about consistency as a reminder is that it is one of 3 key practices that we found across a group of schools that we have dubbed trajectory changing. That's TNTP's label for these schools. To be 100% clear right off the bat, consistent practices are things that any school can implement. So we are not talking about schools reaching a certain pinnacle of consistency. So that's the first important thing to know about consistency and the context of this research. So what it means is consistently delivering reliably good teaching, grade level content for all students, and minimizing the variation between classrooms. So from classroom to classroom. So for all my parents out there, this is that 3 days, 4 days before school, when you find out which teacher your young one is going to be having that year, and having a sinking feeling in your stomach or being excited based on rumors you've heard or what you know. We don't want parents and kids to have that experience. It should not matter which teacher a child gets for second grade, because all of the teachers in second grade should have consistently good instruction, and we should be able to trust that that is how our kids will experience it. So that's sort of what we're talking about here. And that's why I brought my colleague Nadia Nibbs, because she is an incredibly strong coach. She works with teachers across the country on building consistent teaching practices. So Nadia, I'll hand it to you to talk a little bit more and introduce yourself to the group.
Yes, thank you so much, Whitney. So yes, my name is Nadia Nibbs. I currently live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, so not too far, and also here in the Midwest. And I'm really excited to be joining you all today. And like Whitney said, consistency isn't about perfection. It's about increasing the likelihood that instruction is solid, right? Students have consistent access to materials that are high quality, to learning strategies that get them thinking, that get them engaging in those materials, and that has students, accessing the rigor of the appropriate standards for their course. Ultimately, we think about, we want to increase the likelihood that days are good instead of off for our students. And essentially, that becomes something that becomes a lot more feasible, both for the teacher and for our building leaders.
I love the idea about not caring which teacher you get. And because I experience that so often. I experienced that with my own kids going to school, and I experienced it as a teacher, hearing about, oh, I want to get this teacher because they grade easy, or I want to get this teacher because I like them, or I don't want to get that teacher because they're tough on kids, or they're tough on grading, or hard to get an A in their class or something like that. So um, I imagine you mentioned that this is one of the most important areas
Yeah.
to hit on. I imagine it's also one of the most difficult to achieve.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's so many factors that are coming into it. So why we've kind of hit on it, but why is consistency so important to actual student success? How does that translate to student achievement?
Yeah, so I'm going to start going back a little bit to what I said before about trajectory changing schools. So, just as a reminder for what a trajectory changing school is, this is a school that over the course of 10 years, in our research, again, remember, we're not saying that any school, schools have to meet a certain bar, but in our research, we define trajectory changing schools as schools where over the course of 10 years, students grew at least 1.3 years or more every year over time. So what that means is if a kid came into first grade behind grade level, not ready for first grade material, because they were growing at least 1.3 years every year, by fourth grade, they are on grade level. And it happened consistently across the teachers, and it happened consistently from grade to grade to grade. So there was vertical alignment with the school in terms of the consistent instruction kids were getting every year. So I think that's important to name again. That's what we're talking about is students catching up. We're talking about students who come in behind in schools that were implementing these practices that we're going to talk about today. Those students were able to catch up and be on grade level and close the opportunity gap that they may have entered the school with. So what it is in terms of like how it actually plays out in the classroom is every single student is getting access to grade level work, regardless of their starting point. And that is the key to catching up. When we're talking about changing their trajectory, we have to put grade level work at tier 1 instruction in front of students in the first place. That has to be top. And for a lot of our schools that we looked at, this meant that they had high quality instructional materials adopted, and all teachers were using those materials right off the bat. That was foundational in almost all the schools that we worked with. In our study, what we looked at were we did classroom observations across these schools. And just to be clear, we found thousands of trajectory changing schools across the country and decided to do a bright spots case study research. So we honed in on 6 schools that varied in different ways, like the type of leader, the program they use, the curriculum, their geographic location. But what we spent a lot of time, months in these schools watching classrooms. And what we saw in these schools that were changing trajectories for kids was that classroom instruction was rated good or strong 9 out of 10 times. 9 out of 10 classrooms had good or strong instruction. And that's compared to in our other research and the work we do around the country to just 5 out of 10 classrooms in typical schools show good or strong instruction. So when Nadia said before, it wasn't 10 out of 10 everywhere, right? It's not perfect. We are saying 9 out of 10 classrooms, and we are saying good or strong. But instruction was rarely bad. Instruction was rarely below a bar of just good teaching as the bar for what we expect from teachers and what we want kids to experience. So it's the every single day there's a good lesson. Kids, no matter what grade you're in, no matter what class you're in, you're consistently getting access to grade level material and strong instruction. I wonder, Nadia, what you would add to that, because I know you do this work in classrooms and know how it's showing up now in classrooms all over the country too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also really fun to think about this conversation within the context of secondary spaces. So that is where I spend a lot of my support, and even my prior professional experience has mostly been in the secondary space. And a lot of conversation is dominating public spaces right now around career connected learning and thinking about the future of our workforce, right? We're thinking about technical roles. We're thinking about a variety of jobs that are becoming increasingly more challenging to acquire because we have so many folks who need additional supports in order to gain access to those jobs. So when we think about consistently good instruction, are students going through their day having consistent opportunities to engage in deeper thinking, support their ideas with evidence, justify a conclusion they're making, read something challenging and discuss it with a peer. Because all of these things work across lines of difference within their classrooms. Because all of these things help prepare you for a life beyond K-12, one that opens a lot of doors for you to be able to work through. So again, thinking about that why and going back to what is it that students gain access to beyond their K-12 experience because of consistently good educational opportunities at school. Like, we're thinking the long term here. We're thinking about what professional opportunities become now way more accessible to students because they were in a school that provided consistently good instruction year over year.
One thing I'm hearing, and as I read our notes that we've got for today's conversation, in my notes it says students know what to expect and can see their progress over time. Nadia, you talked about things students are doing. What I'm taking away, and correct me if I'm wrong, the sit and get classroom is really obsolete.
Absolutely. A really fun exercise I always suggest for any leader, principal, AP, instructional coach, even district leaders, follow a student. Pick one student, start at the beginning of their day. And even if you can only sit in for 20 minutes every single lesson, and ask yourself, how many opportunities did that student have to read something challenging? How many opportunities did that student have to talk to a peer in that class? How many times was a student asked to cite evidence to justify their thinking, or debate, or solve a complex problem and explain why their stance is better? How many times were they given a chance to disagree with a peer, right? We're thinking about the collective experience of a young person. And sometimes, going back to Whitney's earlier point, depending on your teacher, that could mean that one teacher provided all those opportunities in that one block, and then that student never got another opportunity for the rest of the day. What would be the impact if in every single class, in every single lesson, students got those opportunities, and the collective impact that has on their education in a year, over multiple years, over their entire K-12 experience?
My head's exploding a little bit with that thought of what could happen, what's possible. And you're in the classroom, I believe Whitney mentioned. You've been in classrooms. Can you share stories from schools that are making these meaningful shifts towards more consistency?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share a particular story from that's coming to mind right now. It's not necessarily captured in the study, but they are a school who was really, I'll say, like, impacted by the study and is actively making shifts and changes in a lot of their work. So this school I'm thinking of actually did that exercise, right? It was a sixth grade student. They started with that student at the beginning of the day, and they followed them through their social studies class, math, ELA. They even went to their tier 2 class where they were pulled out to get additional supports. The student was a multi-language learner, thinking about what types of additional supports is the student getting. And their biggest takeaway is that, wow, the learning experience that the student is having is incredibly disjointed. In one space, that student was engaging in a grade level text about the American Civil War. But then in their tier 2 class, they were writing a letter to a pen pal, a pretend pen pal in a different country about their day. And then in another space, they were having a lecture style course where they sat and were asked to take a lot of notes. And then in their math class, they had a lot of notes. They did like 5 problems, but they never had to really explain their work. And this principal was like, wow, this student is learning the English language and trying to become a master of the English language, and they are barely getting opportunities to use the language. They're not talking in their classes. They're not doing the heavy lift of the reading. They're not writing in response to challenging questions. What does that mean needs to change about the instructional priorities in our building so that that student in every single lesson has access to the same core activities, same core principles of having students talk, write, discuss, read at a high quality level in every content area. So that's something that comes to mind around what are schools currently starting to do in response to the research that came out through Opportunity Makers. And Whitney, I know you can speak specifically to a school or two from the study and what you
Sure.
noticed.
Yeah, so the school I was going to share is Center City PCS Brightwood, where the leaders adopted high quality curriculum and really invested early on in the professional development coaching for their teachers so that they laid the foundation from day one. We've adopted this new curriculum, and I know a lot of schools in Indiana are doing that right now or have been doing that over the last couple of years. So a lot of teachers are probably like, yeah, we've adopted curriculum. That's been a crazy time trying to make shifts to my instruction with this new set of content materials. And it was hard at first. Teachers had a hard time because the high quality curriculum materials that are out there, there's a lot online to digest. Sometimes teachers have to change how they approach lesson planning. We call it going from planning to internalizing because we know the material is so strong. Teachers have less planning to do and more on stage delivery considerations to make. And so in this school in 2023, 93% of math lessons were rated strong and 7% were rated as good. None of them were poor. So even though they had in the year before just implemented the new curriculum, because of the coaching and development that the school provided, that there were ongoing collaboration opportunities, they had a really strong professional learning community in place. There are clear expectations from their administrators about what they needed to do, what was tight and what was loose. We talk about that a lot of the time. And then in all of their conversations, they focused on student growth over time. That's something we talked about in our Belonging podcast or Belonging YouTube with Caitlin Sharp about what happens over a long period of time with growth. It's less about a singular teacher seeing a huge jump of growth in 1 year, but instead us looking at the incremental steps over time and being okay with a little bit of growth now, knowing I trust the next grade level teacher to take the student to the next step.
One question I've got coming up is, you mentioned ongoing collaboration with the teachers. How difficult is it to find time for the teachers to get together? Because I know in my work, that's a big issue. You know, when I go in and I have a math department for the whole day, they're together because we've gotten subs for them.
Right.
They don't always have that consistent time to get together. And so being together on the same page with their teaching and their curriculum can be a challenge without that
Absolutely.
time. So talk about that collaboration and how did that play out in your research?
So I'll start with saying the focus of our research was at the school level. And I know a lot of your podcast listeners are teachers. So I want to acknowledge a little bit that disconnect. What we are talking about in our research is what a school as a system can and should do to ensure consistent instruction. Teachers obviously are the key part of that consistent instruction happening, but the school leader has to make a decision and make some hard choices about the kind of collaboration that they're going to allow to happen. So this does start with leaders saying, I'm going to prioritize ensuring that my teachers have time during the day to collaborate in their grade level teams at elementary, at K 4 or 5, depending on if you're 5, 6 or departmentalized. And then my secondary teachers have time as a content team to collaborate. And so it's a trade-off for something else, probably for whether or not you can offer a course. It comes down to the schedule. And we do a lot of work with leaders on helping them make choices for their next year's schedule to ensure that they can truly provide this opportunity, because the instruction won't be consistent without it. It's a key part of it. But Nadia, I don't know if you've worked with a school that you've seen how they've navigated this.
Yeah, sometimes the question that comes to my mind is less about how do we make sure there is time And how do we repurpose the time to make it really intentional and thoughtful and aligned to what we're seeing across classrooms? Because oftentimes, we'll go into, like, say, a PLC, and we know we have that time consistently every week to gather, to meet, to discuss data. And then we leave that space, but the question is still lingering. What am I actually doing differently in my classroom as a result of that time that I just spent with my colleagues? And even just that shift, right? What is the real outcome? What is the objective of the time that I'm spending with my colleagues? Is it to practice an instructional strategy that allows students to do the heavy thinking? Am I modeling? What am I bringing to that space to process and think through and grapple with my colleagues so that we can make sure that across the board, our students are getting consistent opportunities to engage in their materials in similar ways? Like, oftentimes, like, teachers need direction and we need support, and teachers need that guidance around how should the time be spent productively in service of these outcomes for students. So it is like an interesting balance, right? In some spaces, it really is, wow, we are clawing at the schedule to find time for teachers to meet and collaborate. But oftentimes it's, okay, the time is kind of there. How are we making sure that that time is really purposeful?
So let's switch gears for just a second. What are some common misconceptions about consistency in schools? Because Whitney, you mentioned just now this idea about the research and being at the school level, not down necessarily at the teacher level. What are some other misconceptions about consistency in schools that we need to clear up?
I mean, first and foremost, I would say we hear the word consistency and it is a synonym to uniformity. And that is not what we mean. We mean consistently good, not consistently the same. So good teaching has a few key foundational elements, but we know that high quality instruction and grade level content can be delivered in lots of different ways with the personality and values of the person at the front of the room incorporated into that. So it doesn't mean uniform, and it certainly doesn't mean teaching to the test. If anything, consistently high quality instruction gets us even further from teaching to the test and much more closely to teaching in a way that engages students in relevant and meaningful conversation and tasks and texts that they enjoy. It's teaching consistently in a way where students want to be there and have a good time and are challenged and then leave really feeling like they learned something. I think the other piece is around teacher creativity, and I kind of alluded to this, but once we adopt a high quality curriculum, it does ask of teachers to stick to the content that's available in that curriculum. And that can be challenging if you've been making your own materials or collaborating with someone else and sharing materials. But we know those materials are high quality. They've been developed by people with an enormous amount of experience and knowledge about how the brain works and how thinking happens, how learning happens in the brain for students. And so the creativity has to come then in the how and then the ways that you ask students to engage. I don't think it stifles creativity at all. I think it just asks you to be creative in a different way as a teacher. So, and then finally, we've talked about the curriculum a lot, and consistency is about curriculum, but it's not only about curriculum. It also has to include the collaboration we've talked about. It has to include coaching and feedback in some way. And there's the schools in our study in schools now do this in lots of different ways. If you don't have a system where there's an instructional coach that supports coaching directly, there are still ways that teachers can receive high quality coaching and feedback through their grade level teams as a part of using virtual tools. And we've seen all kinds of really cool things that schools are doing to make this work for their teachers.
And go ahead, Nadia, you were going to add something there.
I was going to say, Whitney, that was incredible and very comprehensive. And the only thing I would add too is another misconception is that consistency is just about like tier one instruction, when consistency is also about like, how do we think about the supports that are used to reinforce what's happening in the tier 1 core content spaces, right? It shouldn't feel like a random separate thing. Tier 2 supports should feel like they're in service of what's happening in core content spaces, which then means that there has to be collaboration between our special education team, our paraprofessionals, our speech pathologists, right? Like what's happening in those additional support spaces for students that reinforce the work that's happening in tier 1. So it's not just also like what's happening in the core content, what's happening in the tier 1 space, but how are all these different structures working together to create a cohesive instructional experience for kids?
And we've danced all around this next question about how does the school begin the work? Nadia, I know you mentioned those classroom visits, which, by the way, that's my one big takeaway. I love that idea of following a student, not just doing a walkthrough or walking by the classroom, but actually sitting with that student and having that student experience. What are some other ways that schools can get started in this process?
Yeah, so online as a part of this research, and we'll share the link when you all post the podcast so folks can access it directly because it's free and available to anyone who wants to use it. We have an action guide on consistency. And the very first thing we talk about is that we have to collect some data on what the student experience of instruction currently is. I think that the suggestion Nadia made about following a student is probably the most poignant way. And we see a lot of schools do like once a month as a team, they each pick a student that they follow, and it's a different student from month to month to inform some qualitative information. But schools also use surveys. And this is we have some sample surveys in our action guide that folks can take, and you can do this as a teacher if you want and just survey your students about the consistent experience they're having. We talked about this in our first podcast, Jeff, that I think that gives teachers some evidence to share with a leader to say, hey, I know that my students go to more teachers than just me, and I think that we could be more consistent as a team. Here are some thoughts I have. But also as a leader, making student surveys a part of your structures. We see some schools do focus groups, and then the walkthrough piece is like a key part of this, I think, is schools that have consistent walkthroughs on instruction that are for the purposes of understanding the big picture of what's happening in classrooms. These are not coaching walkthroughs that are evaluations of teachers, but just like what's happening today. What's the level of the quality of instruction today in our building in the aggregate? Those kinds of walkthroughs help us understand what are the strengths on the whole and how can we start to, where are there opportunities to support. Once you've done that and you see the current state, then you have to choose a focus area. This is so important. We see, and Nadia's mentioned this too, and probably will mention this again, we see schools try to take on way too much at once. Because people come to education because they want to do what's best for kids, because they care about students and want to see them learn and grow. And so when you know something's wrong, it's really hard to ignore it. But part of doing this work well is prioritizing. And that means saying yes to a few small things and no to a lot of other stuff. And that can be really hard. But you have to choose a focus area. Maybe it's starting just grade level content. Is content on grade level? That's the fastest way to set that foundational floor for consistent quality instruction. All of the research says that. That is very clear that having that high quality instruction in front of students, grade level content for every kid in tier 1, you've taken 3 steps up the ladder for high quality instruction. Once you choose that focus area, you could use our action guide to pick a catalyzing practice. And there's several listed there. Something I think is really important, we've talked about this in some other podcasts, is this research was meant to be bright spots research. We wanted to see what was working in schools. And so I think that schools that are choosing to take this on should take the same approach. Every school is doing something well. Every school is doing something really well, has a strength that they bring to the community for the students in their building. And if you start there and make tweaks to that thing that you already are doing well, that is often one of the fastest and most rewarding ways to see the results of your work. And it pushes the ball down the hill very quickly. I don't know that it's the best. I personally don't believe that the best thing to do is start at the largest gap place, because I think it takes a really long time to see progress, and it can feel really beating down on you as a person to start like, we're not doing this well and we still aren't doing this well. But if you could say we're doing this well and we could do it better, here's some small things we're going to do. I think that it's such a great way to see the change happen and to support people in taking what was already a strength. Let's make it even better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, this makes me think a lot about what processes we put in place for ourselves to do these steps that you're naming. And it's like, even just having a practice of consistently reflecting. Okay, so we started, right? We assessed what the student experience is. We chose our focus area. We're picking our catalyzing practice. And every step along the way, am I making sure I have to stop and stamp the thing? We assess the student experience. What's the big takeaway? And oftentimes so many things just live up here in our minds, and we have to get it out of our minds and somewhere, put it on paper, write it down, reflect. It's almost like a journaling practice in a way, but it's very actionable, right? And it's around, let's take all this information and really synthesize it down so I can hold myself accountable to that. Because folks will start the work, and we have to stop at each of these milestones and really process, what did we learn? What's our big takeaway? What progress did we make? And let's make that really clear, and let's communicate it. Let's reflect it back to our stakeholders. Let's reflect it back to our teachers and to our staff. Let's reflect it back to our leaders. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Whitney. It's perfect.
And we want schools to be successful. So we have to look at the other side of the coin. What are some of the challenges that schools face with this? What are some of the obstacles that sometimes maybe get in the way of consistency?
Yeah, the first and foremost, the biggest thing we see is biting off more than you can chew, right? Too many priorities at the start of the year. If you're focusing on 80 things, you're not focusing on anything. Second is having those priorities set, but then something happens and leaders change their focus, especially if it's to instructional philosophy or materials. The research is very clear. It is always better for students to stick with a good practice than to change mid-year to try to make a practice perfect. If you knew at the beginning of the year where you started was good, stick with that. That consistency is more valuable to kids than a mid-year change that then undermines everything you've done up to that point. So that's number one, I think. And then, a lot of times we see inconsistent use of standards. We see curriculum is not equitably distributed. So our special education teachers don't actually have a login to be able to access tier 2 and tier 3 resources, or there's no planning time for them to see what's happening in tier 1. Those kinds of things can really undermine this work. And then, change is hard. It is so hard. And it's also the only thing that's constant. So if we're providing ongoing collaboration for our teachers, we are celebrating the wins. That has to happen. When they happen, we have to be looking for those things. I think hunt the bright spots is the phrase we often use. And then seeing it as an opportunity to build buy-in. I think any time that we can point out, we made this small shift, and Nadia, you mentioned this too. It's the idea of consistent improvement, the cycle of improvement. We made this small change. Here's what happened as a result. Now we're going to make this small change. Let's watch and see what happens, and then reflect on how it goes. That cycle repeatedly over time is how the challenge of the change resistance will be overcome.
Absolutely. Another challenge that's coming to mind is, this is going to sound like low-hanging fruit. I apologize in advance, but scheduling, goodness, we have to learn how to protect our time. And sometimes that means it might feel selfish to hold off this hour and tell everybody, hey, if something comes up, I need to field it to you. I need you to step in and support, because I need to protect this time to prioritize this, right? To prioritize consistency, to prioritize, planning in service of the changes that we need to make or the initiatives that we need to initiate. Oftentimes we let things eclipse our calendars and eclipse our schedules because things are urgent, right? We're in schools, people are in buildings, you have to manage your building. And that is very challenging, but often we just have to protect our time, right? And it's not a selfish thing. Sitting down and giving yourself space to think, to process, to stamp, to plan is just as important as the action steps that you actually end up taking and doing.
And that leads right into another question I had was at the administration level, this consistency piece is just one aspect, one thing that they're looking at during their day or week or month or year. How do district leaders support consistency on that larger scale?
Yeah. First and foremost is that consistent instruction has to be a clear goal of the district, right? We have to have said, this is our vision for students. These are the goals we have, and then communicate to everyone, leaders, teachers, and students. These are our priorities this year, and consistent instruction is one of them. And then from there, remove the barriers. And we talked about that a little bit, but a lot of times principals and teachers are doing everything that's asked of them, but there are barriers coming down from the district level that are well-intentioned, but the consequences aren't considered, and there are unintended consequences. And so, again, frequent changes to curriculum, that is going to undermine this work. So giving teachers high quality curriculum out the start, and then investing in the development that they need to internalize that curriculum is going to lead to more consistent instruction. So, and then we've got to monitor what's happening. There's a teacher or a principal from Charlesdale County Elementary, one of the study schools that was in the research itself, said you can't expect what you don't inspect. So if you set those expectations at the beginning of the year, now you have to actually go and see that those expectations are being met.
I love those little quotes. Do you have any more?
I have, yeah. So there's a student, the fourth grade student Eduardo at CE Rose. When he would asked about like what makes this school special, he said each lesson every day matters.
Wow.
Yeah, and that tells you, as a fourth grade student, like he knows that the teachers and leaders at his school are committed to his learning time, and he can see it. That's incredible.
That's amazing that as a fourth grader, he's that aware of the job of his teachers.
Yep.
And how important it is. Yeah. That's great. I'm speechless. That's such a great quote. I might expect that from maybe a high school
Right.
kid, So let's bring it back home a little bit. What tools or resources do you have at TNTP to help schools in this process?
Yeah. I mean, we've shared a little bit about the action guide. There's a whole toolkit actually about the opportunity makers research. There's an action guide on consistency, but there are also some action guides towards, maybe you're a parent listening or a community member, a business leader. There's some action guides for those beyond just teacher or principal. There's also a baseline assessment, and we've talked about this before. We strongly, if a leader's trying to tackle becoming a more trajectory changing school, taking that baseline assessment is going to help you set the stage for a really strong plan. And then there are some tools, like practical tools for building consistency all throughout the action guide and throughout the toolkit. So strongly recommend taking a look at that. The other thing that TNTP offers that we actually offer to a lot of schools in Indiana currently is something called the Insight Survey. So this is a survey that collects student and caregiver input on the learning environment. So for schools that are already doing this and using Insight, if you're out there, taking that data and using it to inform how to make instruction even more consistent, I think that's the step there. But whatever survey, most of our schools survey their students and teachers. It's a key practice in understanding what the community needs. Use that data in your conversations about teacher instruction. Use that data in your PLCs. Make it a part of the conversation so everyone knows what's happening. But there's a bunch of stuff. There's observation protocols, PLC guides. There's some data reflection tools. It's all kinds of stuff that anyone could use it in a school.
Sounds like if somebody wants to get going on this, there's no reason
Jump
not
right
to.
in.
There
Yeah,
are
that's right.
resources.
Yeah,
Yep.
there's no reason not to. So I know your group is partnering with us at Keep Indiana Learning to share this work. We're doing a podcast. We're sending it out on video. We've got a couple other outlets for information. What's the takeaway that you want Indiana teachers to have from this conversation?
Every single educator in a school contributes to a more consistent, equitable experience for students, regardless of their role. And it's attainable. If we focus on steady improvement, we ignore perfection, like Nadia said earlier, but look for good. What would we say? Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. It is attainable for any and every educator that works in a building.
I would also say keep it simple, right? It's like the challenge is already nuanced and complex. And sometimes when we hone in and focus on those key changes, let's do that. Let's start there. Let's keep it simple. Let's ask the straightforward question. What is the state of high quality materials right now? How consistent is it across the board? What is the current state of grade level content? Are the texts that are in front of students the correct lexile level, right? Let's keep the main thing when we're starting initiatives like this and thinking about consistency in schools and in districts, because if we start there, it's easy to build upon and add additional complexity, add additional nuance.
I'm glad that you mentioned that it's not perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. I think so many times I see perfection get in the way of starting. We can't make this perfect, so let's not start. Let's not even do it. It can't be the best. Where if we just focus on making it better, we'll get a return on investment that way.
Absolutely.
So we're about done with our conversation today. So let's boil it down to that kernel of understanding. What's the actionable next step? I'm an administrator or I'm a teacher. I'm in a building. I've listened to this podcast and I know we've got some consistency problems maybe in my building. What's my next actionable step to take?
First and foremost, assess the student experience. Ask students about their learning, and you will hear so much really important and valuable information that you won't be able to avoid acting on it. It's so motivating to hear kids tell you what they need from you. And then it probably will be a lot, and it may not all match up. So you've got to choose something to focus on once you've collected that information, and then monitor your progress as you focus on it. I shrug my shoulders and say that like it's easy, but I think this is the crux of the work. Yeah, just monitor it. But this is the crux of the work that makes schools the kind of place where kids will succeed in their future life. Nadia, what would you add?
It can be done because you've seen it.
Correct.
You've got the evidence.
Correct.
Absolutely. And, encourage our classroom teachers to do the same, right? So it's not just information that lives at the leader level, but I would even ask teachers to think critically about what the student experience is. If you're on a prep time, is there a colleague whom you have a strong relationship with that you can pop into their classroom and see what's happening next door, what's happening down the hall, right? What are the instructional practices that we have in common? What do we have that's different? And I encourage folks to look across content areas, because oftentimes we'll see, wow, there are definitely things that I can learn and pick up as an ELA teacher from the way biology is using claim evidence reasoning to craft really strong responses in science. Okay, here's something that I can borrow in social studies as I'm thinking about supporting students with reading primary texts, right? Social studies teacher, I can borrow these practices from my ELA neighbors, right? There's a lot more that we can gain from one another, but we have to go see, right? We have to do the legwork of learning what's happening in our building and learning what's happening with our colleagues and our peers.
I'm reading our notes again, and I love one of your statements in here that says, "Let student learning become messy."
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
a couple of times in here you've talked about it being a marathon, a relay race. It's not a sprint, right?
No.
And I know myself being in the classroom for a long time, there were times I would get a little down because in the year that I had a student, I didn't feel like I made much progress with that student. But as you said in here, you know, it may not be you that sees that progress, that sees the light bulb moment, but because of the work you did that year, they're able to have that light bulb moment the next year or the next fall or in a couple of years.
Absolutely.
You know, you've laid that foundation and you've built them up so that they can have those experiences later on, even though you may not see those experiences. And
Absolutely.
that's tough sometimes for a teacher.
Yeah.
But we're in this together. It's not just me and my little bubble in my classroom.
Yeah, there's definitely mindset shift, right? Because oftentimes educators put a lot of pressure on themselves to meet a certain level by the end of the year. But yes, it's a mindset shift to think of myself as an individual within a larger community, right? And that community can be on your campus, right? Your 912 community, your 6A community. Or you can think about yourself within the context of your larger district community. Wow, we are a district of K-12. So that means my students will continue to go on for years and years and years beyond me, right? So it is a shift from what's just happening within the context of my classroom to what larger fabric of the student experience am I contributing to for this student? And it is a shift, and it does take some emotional labor. You got to give yourself grace, right? I know that's not an actionable step. People are like, girl, this ain't therapy. I get it. But listen, it is what it is. Like, there is a lot of emotional labor that goes into forgiving yourself, not letting perfection get in the way, taking your time, and really letting things be messy and being okay with kids productively struggling. Because we want to help, we want to jump in. It's uncomfortable to see students get frustrated, but that's all part of the learning process. And then we get to support students through that. And now we built a social emotional skill in that young person, how to weather perseverance, how to engage and practice that fortitude to do something challenging and get on the other side unscathed. So
Your description there, Nadia, reminded me of a word I learned about halfway through my career, and it really helped me understand my place in the school and in the district, and that is holonomy. Holonomy is this idea that I am part of something bigger. That, you know, I'm just a piece of the puzzle, but the puzzle is much bigger than me.
Mhm.
So I've always kind of clung to that word a little bit. So,
but the puzzle's not complete or structurally sound without you. That's the piece there
right,
too, right? Like you
right.
still are critical to the whole picture. And we saw in these schools the behaviors and strategies teachers use that led to that puzzle being as structurally sound as possible for the whole cohort of kids. It's really possible.
We're getting philosophical now. I love it. I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much, Whitney and Nadia, for joining us today. I know I learned a lot. I know our listeners are going to learn a lot from this. And thank you for sharing your insights and your stories about consistency. It's something we can work on and it is absolutely attainable. If you're inspired to take action, check out the Consistency Toolkit linked in the episode description. And don't forget that we're building toward a statewide virtual briefing in March. This is part 2 of our series from TNTP, and we've got 2 more. Whitney, is that right?
At
more to
least,
go
yeah.
in the series. So look forward to those. And follow us so you don't miss out on when those are coming. And thanks for listening. We will see you next time on the Homegrown Podcast. And you can find this series and much more by searching for the Kennel Podcast Network, wherever you get your podcasts. We will also be posting the video of today's podcast on our YouTube channel at Keep Indiana Learning. So thanks again. As I said, like, follow, do all the things. And Whitney and Nadia, till next time, thanks again. It was
so much.
so good talking to you today.
It was lovely.
Same. Thanks, you all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.